Scott Dittman. This is a California guy that really is a Colorado guy, that is now a Pennsylvania guy, but above all else, he's a shipping container guy. And if you are interested in how things actually work in the space, this is a good one for you. Scott Dittman, CEO, Pharmpods. Okay, so it's the Scott Dittman.
In the flesh.
In the flesh, in the blood, or in the flesh and blood, I think.
Yeah, you pick.
Yeah. So Scott Dittman is the CEO of Pharmpods.
Correct.
And basically, if I need to cultivate immediately, you can help.
We can certainly help with that, Seth.
I can plug and grow? No, that's not it.
Yes, plug and grow.
Oh, it is that?
Yes, that is exactly it. That's the catchphrase. I need to get you a t-shirt, Seth.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I'm surprised that you're not wearing a shirt, actually.
You know, I almost always do, as I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
I'm the gear-wearingest CEO in North America, but it always starts a conversation, you know? Anywhere I go wearing our gear, somebody always asks me, what's Pharmpods? And then I get to tell them.
There you go. And you kind of came to that from, some sort of real estate type situation, right?
Yes. Bit of background. So I'm a Colorado kid most of my life, actually born in Southern California, but since 5, I'm a Colorado kid. And I'm a University of Colorado graduate. I was a finance and accounting major because that's what you need to take in order to get a career in the cannabis industry. Mm-hmm. That's what my guidance counselors were telling me at the time.
Right, exactly.
Not so much. I was an Arthur Anderson Big Six accounting guy. I actually got my CPA back in the early 90s.
Look at that.
I never really worked as a CPA. I was more of a process consultant type. But I have my CPA nonetheless. After Arthur Anderson, I got into real estate. That was kind of always my ambition as a kid. I was in San Francisco working for Arthur Anderson, moved back to Colorado, bought into a home building business. Ultimately, with my partner, bought out all the rest of our partners. So ran that business, started a commercial construction business, did some land development. That was all really terrific throughout the late 90s and early to mid 2000s, and that all came to a horrible crash in the end of the early 2000s, just like everybody everywhere else in real estate. So,
indeed.
Yeah, so that's the quick life story and how you get from being a normal person into the cannabis industry.
Sure.
Because somewhere around 2009, I was looking for something to do with myself.
Absolutely, and you've been in the industry long enough that you are coming from it not being a normal person, because now normal people are starting to get in. Have you noticed that?
Yes, right. There's a new normal, right?
Indeed.
I'm the old normal, not the new normal.
Exactly.
Yes, I agree with that.
All right, so we've got to go ahead and tell all the stories that are associated with the background that you gave, but how does Southern California turn into a Colorado kid? When did you move?
Let's see. Well, I am a rather old person. I'm 46 now, Seth, so as long as you said it.
Right.
We moved in 1975 when I was 5 years old.
Look at that.
Born in 69, yes.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
It's a good year.
Yes, well, it has its ups and downs.
Indeed. That's deep is what that is. So do you remember Southern California, though? I mean,
yeah, my dad's entire family is still Southern California, so I spend a lot of time in California and always have.
Got it.
After college, as I said earlier, I moved to San Francisco. So, I'm a Colorado kid, but certainly a fair bit of California in me.
Okay. And when you say Southern California, do you mean L.A.? Do you mean Irvine? Do you mean San Diego?
Orange County, okay, yes.
Yeah.
For the Southern California,
okay.
Yes. We used to be able to watch the fireworks at Disney from my backyard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we were a couple of miles from the happiest place on earth.
There you go. Of course it is. Have a magical day.
Indeed.
So is Will Ferrell your age? Because he's from there.
He's actually my first cousin.
Get out.
No, not really.
All right. Because you're kind of tall.
Yeah.
He's kind of tall.
Yeah, I'm a little better looking than Will, I like to think.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Maybe not.
You're better looking than most people, Scott.
Oh, man, wow.
But no, so you don't remember, there's no connection with him at all?
Not that I recall, although I haven't scanned my elementary school photos, from those days. Maybe he's there.
Maybe he's there.
I don't know.
You don't care is really what I'm getting.
No, I'm a big fan of Will Ferrell. I'm not sure how germane he is to this conversation.
Fair enough. Let's move on. So we get to, did you get to Denver or where in Colorado?
So I actually grew up in Arvada, right, which is a suburb on the northwest side right between Denver and Boulder. So, yep. Arvada High School, North Arvada Middle. I'm an Arvada kid.
Got it.
Yep.
And I have to ask you the sports questions because, I mean, if people haven't met you, you're like, 8 feet 9 inches tall. Ish, right? Well, he's 6'7", something like that, right? 6'4"? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm all the way down here, so I have no idea. So okay. So football, basketball, right? Had to.
Loved all sports. Didn't play. My sports career ended in high school, like every other normal person. So I'm not the kind of athlete that can play collegiate sports. Far from it. But,
that's fine.
Other than ultimate frisbee, I did play that in college.
As did I.
But that's not exactly a real sport, as most people would say.
Not at all.
No, but it is fun.
Yeah. What position did you play in football and basketball? I need to know these things.
Yeah, well, so I was a offensive. I played center mostly on the offensive line, and I played defensive end, right side primarily.
There you go.
Yes, and in basketball, I was a 4 or a 5.
4 or 5. Okay, depending on the lineup, depending on the opposition.
Exactly.
And could you long snap?
I was a hell of a long snapper. If I hadn't given up long snapping, I might have been able to make a career of that. I just didn't realize you could actually be in the NFL for long snapping.
Just for long snapping.
That's a great job.
Exactly.
Actually, in my home building days, I built a home for a guy who was a long snapper for the Saints and the Miami Dolphins. In addition to being a tight end, but he very seldom actually, played as tight end. But he had a very long career as a long snapper.
Interesting.
Yes, exactly.
And in retrospect, I would have been a kicker. We would have been a good team.
Dude,
yeah,
seriously,
exactly.
right. Except I would have caused you endless pain.
Okay.
With bad long snaps.
Oh, I see. Okay, I thought you meant emotional duress.
Well, I might have done that too. Hard to say.
Who knows?
Yeah, can't look backwards.
But you did go to the University of Colorado Boulder.
Yes, I did.
You kind of stayed right there.
Yes, I did.
And then the major, as we discussed, was...
So I was a finance and accounting double major.
Yeah.
Yes. I also got accepted to UCLA, where my father really wanted me to go.
I see.
Whatever. I put myself through college, so that was difficult to do out of state. And besides, I had a steady girlfriend love sort of thing that kept me in state, which you, as a 46-year-old person, you look back with and think moron, But,
right,
but as an 18-year-old kid, your life's view is not expansive.
Totally, and the way that you speak of it's not. I know that you're married to your wife,
yes.
And this is not her. Right. That's because
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a fair bit of mileage between high school sweetheart and getting married, yes.
So for some, not necessarily.
No, that's true. But in my case, yes. No high school sweetheart story.
Got it. All right, so you stay right there in Boulder. You're doing a double major. Why so much work for you? Why did you do that?
Well, it really wasn't all that much more work than anything else, right? Just seemed to have a good career outcome in 2 different areas because I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself, just like everybody else, I think, at that age. Actually, I started as an aerospace engineering major, but there simply were no women in engineering. That's the God's honest truth. So I switched to business.
there just weren't any.
No, I mean, seriously, right? I mean, I had at least enough perspective at that age to realize I was in college not only to become an aerospace engineer. I guess you could always go back and get a master's if engineering was my choice in life.
Indeed, and in retrospect,
I don't regret that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. In retrospect, you weren't in college to be an aerospace engineer at all.
No, as luck would have it.
Indeed. Okay, so you come out with this fancy double major, and then you go right into this thing called Arthur Anderson. And for our millennial listeners, they might not know what that is.
No, that's true. So Arthur Anderson was, at the time, called one of the big 6 accounting firms. So one of the 6 biggest accounting firms on the planet. Ultimately, there were the big 4, and then Arthur Anderson was gone. So Arthur Anderson, yes, had a little bit of trouble somewhere in the late 1990s with a company called Enron, and it tanked the entire firm. I had nothing to do with it, had left the firm years before. Not responsible, leave me alone.
So you're not responsible for Enron.
I am far away from being responsible for Enron.
We're not going to uncover that.
No.
You weren't buddies with Ken Lay.
No, I was not buddies with Ken Lay. I'm completely innocent, as probably was most of the firm. One of those shameful things that happens in the world. But anyway, but a great place to learn a lot of things when you're first getting out of college.
Well, they were very good before that whole thing happened.
Very good, yes.
Highly reputable and everything.
Very good, yes. You'll never find more smart people in one place, I think, than a public accounting firm.
Sure.
Lots of very smart people.
What were you doing specifically?
So I started out in what's considered audit. So I did auditing for my first year, and then I transferred into a group called Enterprise, which was a small business consulting. Then I actually went to Sydney, Australia, and little construction here in New York City.
Indeed. Just so small business consultant.
Yes. So I started out in audit for only about a year. Then I moved into a group called Enterprise, which was small business consulting. I actually then transferred to Sydney, Australia, where I worked in some process consulting and some business valuation type stuff, and then back to San Francisco for some more process consulting, and then out.
Okay.
Yep.
Sydney, Australia, though.
Oh.
What year was this?
1994 into 1995.
Okay. Manly Beach or Bondi Beach?
Well, I loved both, but I visited Bondi more.
Right.
Yes.
That means that you're cooler to Australians.
Oh, well, no question. And I don't drink Foster's either.
No, of course not. You drink VB.
No, actually, I was a Tooheys guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you do know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
you were there for a year?
Obviously, you too, since you know quite a bit.
Yeah, sure. No, I went to Australia and New Zealand, and I have Australian friends, but it's a very unique culture, and it's a very special place on Earth.
Yeah. It's a wonderful place. For anybody who hasn't been there, it's entirely worth the trip. They're wonderful people. It's a super interesting country.
And you were there for a year?
Not quite, but close, yeah.
Okay. And, you lived there, and
Yeah.
Did you live in corporate housing? Did you get the whole experience?
Yeah, so, yes, I lived in corporate housing for about the first month, and then I moved in with one of my cohorts from the firm because it was boring living in corporate housing. And, I lived in right at the base of the Harbor Bridge, frankly, right in North Sydney. It was awesome. Unbelievable, yeah.
And as a young man, what were you, 20, whatever, right?
24.
Yeah. They really do know how to have a good time.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
I would recommend Australia to any single 24-year-old male.
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful place.
Indeed.
Yeah, it really is.
And then did you travel there?
Yeah, I did. I traveled a lot. I also went to New Zealand for a few weeks. New Zealand is wonderful. I traveled on both ends. So I went all over Asia. That's kind of as Seth mentioned, I'm tall. I'm 6'4", blonde guy. Traveling alone in Asia for 3 weeks as 6'4" blonde guy is a bit of an experience all by itself, especially since I was young and not well traveled at that time.
Right.
That'll open your eyes a little bit.
Sure.
And then Australia, and then New Zealand, and we did, Tahiti and Bali, Indonesia, and you name it. I went there on that trip. It was an eye opener for me.
Totally, such a cool and different part of the world, and Southeast Asia very specific in the way that they are, you are talking about being a complete and total fish out of water, and I know what you're talking about because my brother-in-law and I were with my sister, of course, in Southeast Asia, and he is 6 feet tall and blonde, right? Yep. So he's not quite 6'4", but he was a full person length taller than everybody everywhere. Yes. And that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely true. Yes, I stood out all the time, which, sometimes actually that's okay, but on a trip like that, for the most part, that's just kind of annoying, frankly. Just kind of annoying. But
you feel like a building almost, I would imagine.
Yeah, if somebody's going, in some certain parts of the world, people hassle you a fair bit.
Oh, sure.
And, standing out's not a bonus, Let's just say not too many people passed up on their chance to try and, sell me something.
Oh, sure.
Convince me to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we got this thing, you should try.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Hey, you.
So why not the full year? Was that the tenure of the stay, or?
Yeah, I think I only was at work for 6 months, and then there's a few months you're allowed to stay in country while you're traveling before they want you to leave, basically. So,
bring you back.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved Australia, Seth. I would have stayed permanently if there was a way to do it.
Sure.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah. No, it is great. It is a great part of the world, but so is the Bay Area, right?
Yeah, I love San Francisco.
How long were you there for?
4.5 years. If you incorporate the Sydney time in there, because I was in San Francisco, left, and then came back. So,
okay.
I love the Bay Area. I love Northern California. Listen, I love California. I know people like to bash California. I'm not one of those people, California's all right in my book.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are only certain annoying people everywhere in the world. And I think some people get confused and over kind of generalize.
Especially people who haven't been there.
Indeed.
Yeah. Often, yes.
Oh, that's that thing. Yes. Well, not really.
No. Have you ever been there? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
So then, did you get kind of, I would imagine you rose through the ranks at Arthur Andersen in the Bay Area?
Yeah, so in a public accounting firm like that, somewhere around your fourth to fifth year, you either make a career commitment to them or you don't, basically, And I was in the don't camp, Besides, I was getting into my late 20s and ready to think about moving home and, looking for a girl and having kids and all that kind of stuff. So, Bay Area, that's achievable in the Bay Area, but much like New York here, that's that's much more difficult to do in that,
Yeah, if that's your goal, that's not necessarily the place.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, I'm a little more of a traditional kid than that, for sure.
Yeah. So you did just jet right back to Colorado, or?
I did. Yep. Straight back to Colorado.
Okay.
Yep. Bought into the home building business. Had a dozen great years.
So now this was your business. What we call this?
Homes?
Yeah.
Yep. Mine and my partners. Yep. A college buddy of mine.
Okay. And so you're mid to late 20s. So that's early to start your own business, right?
Well, we didn't start it. It was actually his family business. So I came in actually ostensibly to consult with them. That's kind of how I got home to Colorado, and just never left. So and then Matt and I ended up buying. Matt was my partner. We bought out his family not too long thereafter, and it was that was great. I really liked that business. I like real estate, always did. It's a shame it crashed, but then again, life is funny that way. And,
Indeed.
And sometimes you need one door slammed on your toe in order to open another one.
I think almost every time.
Yeah, pretty much. I the older I get, the more I believe that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So 13 years or 17 years. Either way, it was a very long time, right?
Yeah, a very long time. So let's call that, 95 to 2008. So let's call that 13 years.
Okay, so 2008, we know about the end. But 1995, give us a sense of what the market was,
Excuse me. In Colorado at that time, it was just really recovering, right? So Colorado, like all the the oil type states, not that Colorado was necessarily an oil state, but it had a big oil based economy in the 80s. It had a really hard time with the mid 80s recession. Didn't really start to come out of it until the early 90s. And, Colorado's an interesting place. If you've never been there, it's in the West and it's kind of in the flyover part of the West, if you will, surrounded by, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, right? So, not a whole lot of folks living in that part of the country, I mean, actually, I don't know what the stat would be, Seth, but if you drove out of Denver, you'd probably have to drive, 10 hours to get to another city of 500,000 people or more.
Right.
Probably Kansas City in one direction and Salt Lake in the other.
Right.
Phoenix going south, and you could drive north all the way through Canada and come over the North Pole and not run into 500,000 people. So, so it's pretty remote, and as such, not just from the home building market, but, Colorado really changed a lot in that 20-year time frame. I mean, it kind of grew up, Denver was really more of a cow town in the 90s, and now, it's finally has, a really cool, vibrant downtown life and a really cool downtown scene. And, something like 700,000 people have moved into the city limits in the last 20 years. And you can feel it, it's an entirely different place than it was when I was a kid, when I grew up there.
What was the call? You're a, Colorado University alum, or University of Colorado Boulder alum. What was the call to Colorado from a home builder's perspective before cannabis? Because this is the years that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, sure. A lot of things. I think it has a fairly well-educated population. It has a great airport. All the metrics that the types of people who do corporate planning and figure out where to move your home office. Colorado was meeting a lot of those guidelines. Lots and lots and lots of people coming into Colorado.
Right.
Relatively inexpensive housing market. All that kind of stuff. A lot of that is probably not as true anymore. I mean, if you for those of us in the East Coast now, if you went west of the Mississippi, other than getting all the way to the coast, where you pick up, California and Seattle and, Oregon,
right.
Colorado is probably the most cosmopolitan part of that entire part of the country,
Sure.
And yet, once you leave the confines of Denver, you're in the middle of, nowhere essentially, and for hours in all directions, so it doesn't have the overcrowded feeling, even still,
Right.
It's still, you can, for anybody who's flown into DIA, you can, I mean, hell, they built that airport 12 years ago or something, and it was far outside the city then. It's far outside the city now.
Yeah.
I mean,
still not close.
No, still not close. Yes, exactly.
And this is the other Denver airport. This is not the one with the creepy horse.
No, that's the one with the creepy horse. Yes, DIA. Yeah.
Okay.
We only have one.
Because I just type in DEN.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the call. That's the call. Yes, it's Denver International Airport, but DEN is the three letter symbol. Yes, exactly. Yes.
So as a traveler,
traveler,
I don't want to.
You get to know all the airports by the airports. Yes, DEN is Denver.
Don't want to confuse
absolutely
anybody.
correct. No, for those of us who grew up there, it's DIA because it's Denver International. But yes, but no, the three letter yes, DEN.
Fair enough.
Important correction.
So yes, thank God. Public or private was Equity Custom Homes.
No, all private businesses up until this one, right? So, so Pharmpods, Fusion Farm, the parent company, is a publicly traded company, traded on the OTC markets.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a second. I just want to make sure I understand. I come into Scott's office at Equity Custom Homes, and then what happens?
At Equity Custom Homes?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're buying a house.
Sure. Okay.
In which case, I sit you down and treat you nicely.
Sure. And I can make a custom home. Is what it seems like.
Yeah. So
for not too much money.
Well, it was pretty expensive.
Okay.
We were Equity Custom Homes was a luxury home builder. We built high end
high end. Yes. Okay. All right.
But environmentally friendly was our thing. So I am a Boulder kid, right? So I am a green person at heart.
Got it.
I take that seriously. I live on a hobby farm now with my wife and kids. We raise chickens and goats. My wife's a master herbalist. I'm kind of that guy,
Yeah.
And even in building large custom homes, building them environmentally friendly was important to me. So that was our tagline, if you will.
And so now everything is LEED certified. But before that, what were the ways with which to make it green?
Look at you talk about LEED certified, right?
Yeah.
So I got to see LEED come into existence. That's how old I am. Mm-hmm. So we had in Denver, not to bore the heck out of the listeners, but we had something called the Built Green program, and I was one of the founders of the Built Green program. You don't know this about me? Yes. So yes, I helped found the nation's first and biggest green building program, run by a home builders association.
What was the definition of that before LEED, or was that a kind of a precursor to LEED?
We were there before LEED.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So what were you going for? What were the rule sets?
It was very similar, right? We were super into energy efficiency, insulation, recycling, using refurbished products, that sort of thing. Same type of stuff that LEED works on. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I feel like we've done that now.
Probably. I mean, unless we want to run this podcast on the National Home Building Network.
we could do that, right?
I mean, if you want to. It's your show set.
Exactly. We can do whatever we want with distribution. Thank you. So Equity Custom Homes, you're running it with your partner. You buy out the other partners. Everything's going great, except for, of course, the economic apocalypse, and that's what kicked you out.
Yes, us and everybody else.
Right.
Yes. I mean,
Is that pretty much it?
That was pretty much it. Yes, there was nobody in that space of any size that didn't just get torpedo sunk in 2008. That's just the way that goes. It took me a couple of years to bleed out completely, but the writing was officially on the wall in 2008, and there was no getting away from that train.
Right.
Important lesson. First time in my life I ever couldn't control something. Something that I'd worked that hard for and was entirely out of my control.
That was the first time.
First time.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe not the only time, but the first time.
I got you. That's when you knew what that feeling was.
Yes,
the
exactly.
second time, you're like, oh, this has happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, at least it had a little bit less shock because of it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So at that point now you're what, 30, 32, 3, 5, 7?
So I was 38, 39.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're an adult person at this point.
Yeah, young kids.
And you have young kids,
Yeah.
and so how much, oh, fuck.
There was a fair lot of oh fuck. There's
Right.
there's no question. When you realize that everything you've worked, most of your adult life for is going to go away in the next 2 months, and you're powerless to stop it, and you have a wife and let's say a 4 and 6 year old child at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a shocker for somebody who's generally been in control and succeeded at what he's been up to.
Indeed.
Yeah, that was an eye opener.
So was your wife employed at the time?
Nope. She was
wow.
taking care of the kids full time, still does.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you to her for that.
Yes, for sure. Yes, and now we have a farm, we live on a hobby farm, so she has that to deal with as well. So she has her hands plenty full without being in the traditional workforce, if you will. So
Right.
Yeah.
And then is that when you moved to the hobby farm, or is it not that neat?
Yeah, more or less. There was a line of demarcation there for sure,
Right.
because we were living in the really big house with the really big payments. Yes, so that was certainly the demarcation line. My wife very much into she's, like I mentioned, a master herbalist, very much into all things organic and natural and whatnot. So that was something she may have wanted to do that I would have said no to in a different situation, and life's funny, Life's
Absolutely. It's easy to say yes when you have to.
Yes. You'd like to move out to the country to a much less expensive living environment. I think that's an excellent idea.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I am 100% on board.
Is she, because you're Pennsylvania now, is she kind of northeastern?
Yeah. Yes. My wife is a Jersey girl.
Oh, wow.
Yes. She's a Central Jersey girl, Rutgers girl. So she wanted to get closer to her family. I travel a ton, whether I'm traveling from Denver or the East Coast. So 2 years ago, we up and moved to the East Coast. I figured I'd be front running the cannabis swing on the East Coast, as well as perhaps the relaunch of produce, or an increase in our produce activity. As it turns out, cannabis is very slow to develop in new markets, as we all knew anyway.
Indeed.
I was expecting the East Coast to at least have some momentum by now, but it'll get there. We got Maryland coming on. Maybe Maryland changes the game. Maybe Massachusetts actually starts to do something this year.
Right.
Maybe a lot of things, Seth, in this business. We do a lot of business planning around maybe, which is also quite frustrating sometimes.
Well, there's maybe up here and there's maybe over here.
I tell people all the time, every state except for Pennsylvania of the original 13 has, a medical marijuana law. Most people don't have any realization that that's true.
Right.
It's just that none of them really do much with it yet, So as opposed to, Colorado and Washington, where everybody pays attention, since that's all the activity.
And I just went up to Alaska, and they're full steam ahead, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Alaska. That'll be an interesting one. I've been to Alaska a couple of times. I'd love to go back, and I'm interested in Alaska.
There's certainly opportunity there. Not much of a population.
No, yes, 500,000 souls in total. Yeah, does not a huge market make, but, hey, but a market.
But there's a market.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so opportunity there. All right, so now you've got this Jersey. How did you meet the Jersey girls? You got this Southern California Denver guy.
She was in Denver. I like to think she came looking for me.
Of course she did.
She doesn't necessarily see it that way.
No.
However, no. Yes, no. She was.
You said she's from Central New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah. So she sees very little the way that I see it, unfortunately. No, yeah, she was.
And you know what I know is that she's right.
Oh yeah. Listen, I know that. Believe me, honey, if you're listening, yes. I know that too.
So okay, so she went to Denver, and what was she doing in Denver?
So she was in the workforce then. So she was at the time working for. She was actually working for the Muscular Dystrophy Association at the time.
Okay.
And then later did some work for Dish Network, and then she got lucky and married me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Then the whole thing fucking tanks, and she gets to move home.
I'm not sure how much luck she's seen in that the last, 8 or 9 years, but hey,
Right. That's it. Okay, well, but then, so, this 2008 is the opportunity, of course, right?
Of course,
and
yes.
in every downturn, there's an opportunity. How quickly did you connect the dots between this and that?
You're speaking to the cannabis industry, of course. So, listen, I didn't really understand. In fact, not even really. I didn't understand there was a cannabis industry at all.
Yeah.
Listen, I went to the University of Colorado. I certainly had smoked marijuana, but I had never seen a live pot plant until 2010. But as luck would have it, a realtor that I did a fair bit of work with in my real estate life approached me about investing in one of these new marijuana businesses. I had no idea that there even was a new marijuana business. That was, fortunately I have a younger brother who's a bartender, so I could check with him, and he said, oh yeah, there's definitely a new marijuana business. And what can I say? I was intrigued, I mean, listen, I've never not been a risk taker. Being in any sort of real estate venture is always a risky business, as 2008 proved. I was nervous about it, given that I had a wife and children, but given that I was facing fiscal calamity anyway, it was the right time to take an even bigger risk, right? It was something that had the potential to have huge rewards. So, I jumped in, and, very quickly in the beginning, Seth, I had 2 infused products companies and 2 dispensary licenses as well.
Right.
I didn't, at that time in the industry, it was so scary, government scary, that it was just too much, frankly, for a guy like me and for my family and whatever,
Right.
So, I also got crossways with my partner, who may not have been that trustworthy. And long story short, within 12 months, I jettisoned the actual participation in the industry, but got to see the cultivation side start to develop. It was the first time. It's difficult for people to realize, but it was the first time in recorded human history that any government entity ever gave people a license to grow marijuana for a profit.
Right.
People always think of Amsterdam and the Netherlands, and there's no such thing there.
Correct.
With the exception of Bedrocan, who grows for the government in their government program. It's not. It had never happened. And in Denver, it was fascinating to watch it happen. Fascinating. And I enjoyed the cultivation side. I'm a plant guy. I mentioned the hobby farm, all that stuff. I'm a huge plant guy, just not a marijuana plant guy at the time. And now I'm a marijuana plant guy. So,
right.
Yeah. So
okay.
It's been nothing if not interesting.
Indeed. And so you were right there, right at the right moment as far as cultivation was concerned. You kind of had a couple of different opportunities. You're like, I'm not going to take those. But then as far as the plant was concerned, how did that, these discussions with your brother, the bartender, and investors and things like that, how did that turn into what became Pharmpods?
Sure. So as part of owning the dispensaries, we had a need for cultivation. We had cultivation licenses like everybody else. We did what everybody else did. Went out and rented a big warehouse, threw a whole bunch of plants on the floor, and hired a grow consultant and assumed that we would be making lots of money, 3 months from now, right?
Sure.
Absolutely. This is how it works, right?
As soon as we harvest, we'll be fine.
Exactly. Like everybody else, and at that time in Denver, everybody did the same thing, and nobody knew any better. All of cultivation, IP or intelligence or technology, if you will, had come from the clandestine basement, garage, setups, and taking something from 4 lights to a couple of hundred lights. Everybody just assumed that the game would be played the same, and we all learned very painfully in the summer and fall of 2010 that that's just not the case. It's very difficult on large scale in large open space to prevent hermaphroditing plants and to prevent pest infestations and all the things that destroy marijuana crops. And we had that by the bucket full in Colorado, not just us, but everybody.
Everybody, yeah. Exactly. Other folks have brought it up, and so once that happened, did you say to yourself, well, what am I doing here?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And fired the grow consultant and hired another one who didn't know what he was doing either, and fired him and hired somebody else. It was very difficult to find anybody who, could answer any question at the time. Everybody had learned from a guy, and nobody knew anything about horticulture, period. It was really voodoo mostly at the time.
Well, if you've got a basement, those guys can help.
No, listen, and they learned from, Roger Raincloud himself, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Surely he was right. So it was, for me, being much more of a methodical process science guy, it was extraordinarily frustrating, but what we all seem to learn at the same time is that, you can take these big spaces and make them into a bunch of smaller, more controllable environments, and now the metrics that you understood could be applied to the game, right? And plus the risk exposure of having giant rooms with thousands of plants in them is mitigated by having less plants in smaller rooms, right? So it fixed a lot of problems. And everybody started making that maneuver, ourselves included. We were facing several $100,000 of tenant improvements in my landlord's building, which I refused to do. And I'm a shipping container guy, and always have been ever since my home building days. So I said, I'm going to put them in shipping containers, and went looking for the technology to do so, and just kind of never looked back. And back to life is funny, right?
There you go.
Funny, yeah.
There we go. All right, so that's exactly how we got there. Let's just take a step back to I'm a shipping container guy, because when we spoke about Equity Custom Homes, that didn't come up.
So shipping container. Actually, I have 2 other run-ins with shipping containers. In my Arthur Anderson days, my biggest client, was American President Lines, which is one of the world's biggest shipping container companies. So I had a lot of exposure to them and what they do. And then in my Equity Custom Home days, we did a project with the University of Colorado for did some consulting through the Home Builders Association on the solar decathlon through the Build Green program that I mentioned.
Right.
And that's build a very small, energy efficient house, put it on the Capitol lawn sort of project.
Right.
Very early in the conversation, shipping containers were considered for the platform. They're very thermally conductive and horrible to insulate, so we jettisoned them. But in doing research for that, I saw all the many people using them for housing and a great many other things, and I'm a process guy. I see something like that, I think, that's a good idea. There's literally something like 7.5 million of those things sitting empty in the U.S. at any one time, and they're 40 feet long and 9.5 feet tall and 8 feet wide and strong as heck, with a door,
Right.
a very useful Lego, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the second time you've called it a Lego.
Well, it is kind of like a Lego. People often say that to me, and so I've adopted that vernacular.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It makes sense to the people. Why not adopt it?
Well, listen,
You're a man.
I'm a people pleaser.
Exactly. So when you're flying, speaking of travel, and you see the vast fields of shipping containers, this is an exciting moment for you.
Yes, exactly. Like, oh my God, look at all those marijuana grows.
Gonna have to get into that guy.
Exactly.
How do you? I mean, let me take that tangent. How do you find your containers? I mean, is it that easy?
It's actually really really easy. Excuse me. So shipping containers are a very fungible commodity. Even in Denver, Colorado, landlocked in the center of the United States, we have 3 different container companies that we buy shipping containers from. Just in Denver alone, and there are probably more. I have no idea if there are more than 3. 3's enough for us. So even in Denver, we have lots of people selling shipping containers.
Yeah.
We're very short of ports. If you haven't flown into Denver lately, So
seen a map.
So buying or seen a map.
Yeah.
Yes, just as simple. So buying shipping containers is simple. We buy what are called one ship containers. So every shipping container on Earth these days is manufactured in China. So they get filled with goods, shipped to the U.S. Before they refill them and ship them again, we get our hands on them. So it's as close to new as is humanly possible. That ensures they're not beat up, rusted. The doors, especially the doors, still work. Because for us, having the door swing relatively easily is important to our customer satisfaction. And old shipping containers, that ain't the case. It's not worth it to buy old shipping containers. So so we start with one ships and retrofit them completely. Next obvious question is, how do you retrofit those containers, Scott? So I'm going to jump right ahead. So
keep going, man. This is great.
I'm going to go a little Trip Keebler on you right here. So we take shipping containers. We obviously paint them. Outside, that's a simple white generally, but we can paint them any color our customers like. Inside, we use a 94% reflective antimicrobial paint. Obviously, we want to reflect as much light as we can in our growing environment. Antimicrobial is probably not really necessary inside of a steel box, but makes government people happy and doesn't cost much, so why not? We use a rolled-on rubber flooring process currently, although we're about to change that too. Everywhere you go, you find you have slightly different government and code issues, and we found after 4.5 years of doing this that it's best just to take the most stringent requirement known to man and meet it, and then offer it in all marketplaces, because even if they aren't asking for it in your market today, they'll be asking for it in your market a year from now.
Indeed.
And better for your customers not to get caught with their pants down and have to retrofit everything.
If you can just do it that way this time, why wait?
No, absolutely. Yes, because your government will figure out what their government did, and they'll say, well, that's a good idea, and they'll do it too.
Yeah.
Yes, which ask any Denver cultivator how that's been for 4 years, and they'll explain to you the myriad of changes in the rules that they've had to overcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got a new idea on packaging.
Yes.
Okay,
packaging.
great.
Yes, right. Oh, yes. Don't even start the infused products guys on packaging.
Oh, well,
yes.
We have, as a matter of fact.
They will be not too happy about that.
Indeed. No, but I think that there's 2 sides of that equation. I think that they are happy in the big picture of things. They're not happy to have to make the change on a dime, that's
exactly
right. I
yes.
think we agree on that.
Yes.
So I love the fact that you have this warehouse that you need to section off, and you think back to the Arthur Anderson days, whether it's in Australia or San Francisco, and you say, shipping containers. And then you go forward to the Equity Custom Homes and you say, shipping containers. And then you start a shipping container company, basically.
Well, listen, I mean, it was just, necessity is the mother of invention, and that's simply the truth. We needed a whole bunch of rooms, and we didn't want to frame them and leave them there when our landlord kicked us out. And that was a really reasonable, future path in that industry at the time, and even still, listen, in this industry and with professional cannabis cultivators, in every new state especially, but even in a state like Colorado, which is as stable as it can possibly be,
right?
You still have more instability than any other business ever has to deal with. Cannabis cultivators get, zoned out and kicked out of cities in Colorado to this day. It happens, Denver is as popular as it is because it is the most stable climate with which you can, politically speaking, that you could ever find, and everybody is willing to pay a premium for a little bit of peace of mind. It's, doing business planning in a world where God, I hope the city doesn't just zone our business out and tell us to leave tomorrow, is a very difficult proposition, you know?
Absolutely.
And, you know, grows move, and shipping containers move easily. You know, we can put them on every truck, train, and boat on planet Earth and move it anywhere you want. So
it's even in the title of the shipping.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Here's not container.
Yeah, so it fills a very real need there. You know? If you need to take your toys and move to a new building, please do.
So, fair enough for, you know, kind of the concept, but in terms of 2010 is kind of what you were talking about, and now here we are, 2015. Over this period of time, how much have things changed? It was an immediate need then, right? And so then, okay, great, and now we need to move grows, and then now we're going to start in a new state, and I get all that. But in terms of the, you know, basic operations, how have things changed for you guys?
As a product and as a company, they've changed so much, it's really difficult to even, you know, put it into words. And anybody in the cannabis industry for any period of time now is nodding their heads at the podcast, because, you know, if you learn one thing being in this industry at this juncture, at this point in time, is you got to be light on your feet and ready to change for whatever, because you can't hardly even predict what whatever is going to be, you know? So, I mean, our product, Seth, compared to what we were doing in 2011, you know, really ostensibly we started as a company in the middle of 2011. Our product today versus our product then, you know, we like to say it's, you know, Fred Flintstone, you know, in a car versus, you know, a Jaguar today. It's, you know, the products are very, except for the fact they're in a steel shipping container, are very difficult to even tell they're the same product. And that's great news for our customers. You know, as a company, barely distinguishable. I mean, barely recognizable compared to the, you know, the company we were 4 years ago.
Give me a few straightforward changes along the way. Give me the tent pole changes.
Oh, well, let's see. In the first year, the company was me, and pretty much me, in terms of the only actual employee that the company had. So now we at least have employees. You know, we have, you know, 17,500 square feet of manufacturing in Denver, and you know, we're a big boy company these days. You know? We have employees and officers and the whole nine yards.
And then as far as the product offering, how has that changed? If the old one was Fred Flintstone and this one's a Jaguar, you know, etymology of...
So it was one container in the beginning. It was one container. You know, it was a farm pod that grew plants, and it had to do all things for you. You know, that is almost a laughable proposition today, because we make containers for every individual function within, you know, cannabis cultivation. We make containers for nursery and propagation, mothers and clones. We make containers for veg phase. We make containers for flower phase. We make containers for dry cure. We build containers for extraction equipment. We make containers for everything. So, you know, we literally could take your warehouse with not a scrap of anything in it and put everything in a container. In fact, we have a project on the drawing board in Denver for exactly that. Everything including office space, break space, and bathrooms, all in shipping containers. So picture a giant building devoid of anything in it except plugs on the walls and some hose bibs, and every single other thing that you need in 3 levels, stacked 3 high, comes in on shipping, you know, inside of a box.
Why do I want that?
Because when you leave the building, it's a useful warehouse again. You know, you didn't, you know, what we have done as an industry is take an enormous amount of warehouse space in the city of Denver, you know, somewhere in the 6 to 7 million square feet today, and turn it into office space inside of warehouse, you know, because we've come in and put walls and ceilings and air conditioners and, you know, granted, we're growing plants in the offices, but, you know, to the owner of the building or to the next tenant, that's entirely useless, you know? So when we leave, we rip everything out and throw it all away, or the landlord does the same. That's both expensive on the front end and expensive on the back end, and kind of stupid in between, frankly.
Absolutely.
With warehouse space, you know?
And speaking of Trip Keeper, before he moved into his new facility, he was in a trailer. So there you go.
I should have built it for him.
Indeed.
I'll have to call Trip.
Indeed. All right. So we're kind of what I'm trying to do is get out of you what we're going to find out in November. And I'm sure you're going to tell us that we have to wait. But if we're going from Fred Flintstone to a Jaguar, the next step is what? Like a 2001, A Space Odyssey, or
so we have had a fair bit of time and introspection in the last 12 months as a company, and we have done a fair lot of R&D work. Listen, we're always doing R&D work, Seth, but we've really done a fair lot of R&D in the last 12 months. We are relaunching an entirely new product grouping, if you will. Like I said, some of it I don't want to speak about yet, but it's relatively dramatic in terms of how our product both works and feels, essentially. You know, so the biggest change, which I have mentioned previously, is we're no longer going to be limited to the 8-foot wide footprint of a container. We will now have containers that span multiple widths, so you can have larger rooms, which allows for different types of growing platforms inside of the rooms. But the look, feel, and technology of these things is much more advanced. We're talking about not only modularity. Modularity is a huge word in our business specifically because we sell growing modules, right? If, our biggest customer today is running 46 of them. Our biggest customer this time next year will probably be running 110 of them. And you can start with however many make sense for your business. In a new market, our typical customer starts with 6 to 12 containers, and over the process of a year and a half, as their plant inventory grows and demand for their product grows, we just keep dropping off containers, and they keep bringing more and more production online. It's a very seamless, easy to achieve way to go from a small grow to a very large grow without spending all the money on a very large grow day one when you aren't using most of the grow.
Totally. And when you bring up new customers and new markets, right? We've got Nevada. We spoke to Leslie, and we know a number of people that are making their way into Nevada. And so that's a kind of a brand new space, and I can see how I would modularly place you there and then grow from there type of thing. What are you finding from old customers that are existing in new states? What are they talking to you about?
Sure, so that's an interesting question. We do a lot of conversing with our customers all the time. This is still a relatively small business in a exploding marketplace. We have customers today, Seth, in Canada, everywhere from Moncton, New Brunswick, all the way to Southern California, and we have them in Colorado and Arizona and Washington and California and Vermont and you name it. We've got soon Massachusetts and everywhere else. We spend a lot of time talking to our growers because growers all have an opinion on how things should be done.
Right.
Every grower, we like to say that every grower is Gordon Ramsay around the shop.
Sure.
And they are all just as certain that their way of making, beef Wellington is the only way to make beef Wellington.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, they're all right because they all have great beef Wellington. It's not the same, but they're all right, and they have something to teach us every day. And we have been blessed that way in having a broad variety of growers in a broad variety of places using our product, and they use it differently, and therefore we have been able to take, an interesting look from 50,000 feet and say, okay, in general, this is the most successful way to cultivate, and part of our relaunch in November will be a much more, with us filling much more of a consulting role to our customers and saying, okay, this is really how you should grow.
Right.
This is, overall, most productive, cheapest cost per gram, most bulletproof, this is how you should grow.
And if you want to change that, please do.
Oh, yes, of course, and they will, and that's a given. But
have you gotten the Gordon Ramsay kind of thing? Have you gotten pushback? I'm not going to grow in a shipping container.
Sure, yeah, often. That's the only very seldom do we get objections from the business people.
Sure.
Our product as a business model is pretty easy to understand.
Plug and grow makes sense for the business people.
Yeah, saves you time up front. It's extremely secure. You can move it to a new building. We offer financing. There's a million good business reasons. The objections we tend to come up against as a company are more from the grower, and primarily the grower saying, the box is too small. Generally, we can show them that that's not the case and show them how they should utilize the container. but sometimes it just requires too much of a mental, too much of a paradigm shift for the grower to get them over it.
Got it.
Which is why going to the bigger boxes is important as a sales tool for us. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, we'll
So
really broaden our market.
I got it. So we don't even necessarily need to increase the size of the box.
No, I don't. I think the answer is no, but the market is the market.
Indeed.
And I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. It does give opportunity for more growing styles that require more space.
Okay.
But just the same, the style that we think is the most effective, cheapest producer in the game and most reliable, you really don't need the double wide box, but it doesn't hurt to have it.
And we're happy to talk to artists and work with artists.
Listen, all the time. Listen, I love my growers. I really do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say they don't, cause me considerable ass pain from time to time, because they do. But growers, if nothing else, are super passionate about what they do. All of them.
All of them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
much like chefs. That's why I always use that Gordon Ramsay reference, because chefs are like that too.
Absolutely.
They're passionate about what they do. And so are growers.
And then what you get is a great meal or a great product.
Hopefully so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did mention the fact that you're publicly traded,
We are.
right? And I read an article,
Oh, you did.
Yeah. And so I think it was maybe even 2 articles, but it was on the same thing.
Might have been.
Yeah. And so what happened there? What is this about?
Listen, so there's limited, so we have an ongoing government investigation into the company, right? We are in the cannabis space, much like the other dozen or so publicly traded cannabis companies that have an ongoing government investigation. They took an interest in our company last year, halted trading on our stock, which is a brutal blow to any cannabis company. They did the same thing to all of us, a 2-week suspension. I can't get into the details other than to say we're cooperating at all times and trying to bring this thing to an end. It's a very frustrating problem, but one that we deal with and doesn't really affect what we do day to day. It's just a perception issue and a lot of paperwork and a lot of darn lawyer bills.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a timeline that you've been provided, or not necessarily even?
Nothing that's reasonable to broadcast. The simple answer is the federal government has 5 years with which to keep an investigation open. We are certainly hoping for significantly less.
Indeed. And we're happy to serve at their pleasure.
Indeed.
Right. Okay, good. So good. We did that. We've got 2 final questions that we kind of ask everybody. And I do want to ask you, but I do want to talk about Alaska. I don't now remember if we talked about Alaska before we started or after. After. We did talk about it. How easy is it for you? Said you're all the way up to New Brunswick and through to Southern California. To go to Barcelona, to go to Alaska, to go to these new markets. We talked about the Netherlands. I mean, it's a shipping container, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So listen, easy. Really, from all aspects, Seth. We could either ship them there, which is what we have historically done.
Yeah.
But more.
And then will you send a guy? Is that how?
Yeah. So we handle installations now all the time, because it's listen, it's yes, it's plug and play, but when you're sending somebody $500,000 worth of cultivation equipment, sending them somebody for 3 or 4 days to get them set up and make sure everything is operating perfectly and they understand the computers and how everything works is an obvious no-brainer, right?
Yeah. Why wouldn't we do that?
No, of course. In foreign markets, we have now started producing our Canadian pods in Canada. And in most, if not all foreign markets, that will be the game plan. As we standardize what it is that we do, and standardization is a huge deal for us internally as a part of our product architecture.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for us to take what it is we do and do the construction somewhere else. The good news is, again, there are shipping containers everywhere, all over the world. So to some degree, building them, domestically and shipping them to other people, even building them in Colorado and shipping them to the East Coast, is not going to make sense. The embedded cost of shipping is 5 to 7% of the cost of product, and there's no reason for that.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure I understand your terminology in terms of building. You're talking about retrofitting. You're still using that same concept of ship it once with stuff in it, and then we'll take it over.
For sure, yeah.
Okay.
It's just a matter of where we do the outfitting of the containers.
Outfitting, if you will. Okay, great. All right, so the 2 final questions sound the same. One is what has most surprised you in cannabis? The other is what has most surprised you in life? And so we talked about the fact that you have a wife and kids, and we stay away from talking about the kids too much because why do that? But first things first, what has most surprised you in cannabis?
What has most surprised me in cannabis, huh?
And this is when you can just go off on 280E if you want to.
Well, there's an awful lot of things that jumped into my mind when you asked me that because, the simple answer is cannabis surprises us all every day.
Every day.
I mean, people ask me, often for my prediction of how things are going to happen or what's going to happen on a federal level or whatever. And, where 2 years ago I would have answered that question, now I pretty much just shrug, because I think trying to predict that future and getting back to your question, the most surprising thing is just how strange the government operates is really the answer to that question,
Sure.
And baffling as an American citizen, it baffles me sometimes, people are, 70% of the people in the country, want this over and done with, and we can't even get banking done.
Right.
It's very frustrating and that's true on local government level, that's true on state government level, that's true on federal government level. To watch the government try and wrestle with this industry is astonishing sometimes, frankly.
Yeah. You are directly inside. You can't be more inside than you. But me being able to take a couple of steps back, it does seem like the conversation is going the way that we want it to. It does seem, whereas it might be, micro and not fast enough, it does seem like every time we go in the right direction, right?
I agree with that. The wind is definitely in the industry sails. There's no question, it's just a matter of time, and, I think we as citizens always like to take some shots at the government anyway for how they do everything. Pretty much that's one of our national sports.
Absolutely.
So probably we're a little more conditioned to do that than we should be. But, still, you find yourself scratching your head,
Yeah.
The other answer to that question might be on a more positive note, being a Coloradan and having watched the industry develop in Colorado, that's also been pretty surprising, and it's, for people who aren't from Colorado or haven't spent time in Colorado or aren't industry people these days, Colorado was very much like everywhere else when this first happened. It was very much, oh my gosh, and not in my backyard, and this is crazy, and what are we doing, and more dispensaries and Starbucks and all of that stuff, and in 4 years, that has pretty much turned around 180 degrees, and it's not because Coloradans smoke more pot than other people. I doubt strongly that that's actually true.
Right.
It's that we've seen it now, listen, 30% of the people are always going to think that legalizing marijuana is a horrible idea, 30% of the people are always going to love it, and those middle 40, are pragmatists, and the facts are, use in schools is down. Use in underage minors is down. Drug arrests are down. No perceptible change in, DUI, which is no surprise to the industry, but a surprise to people outside the industry.
Right.
And huge taxes up. It's really a win-win. Plus the Colorado economy is roaring.
Yeah.
And people in Colorado, think a big part of the reason is this. And there's a good reason for them to think that because that's the truth.
Yeah, there's a few billion reasons at least.
That's exactly right. It is, if you simply want to be a pragmatist about it, there are very few facts that are on the wrong side in this argument, if you're an industry person, it's been a complete winner. And even with just, Joe Housewife in Colorado, they understand now, it's not cool to be bigoted against the marijuana industry in Colorado. People have gotten over that remarkably in 5 years to my estimation. And I'm a, college educated 46-year-old white dude, for what it's worth.
Take what you say with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I might be exactly in the genre that you would think would not think that was, that would not be looking at it that way.
Exactly.
And would be, I think, 100% wrong.
Well, that is most of the people that we talk to don't look or sound like anybody that you would think would be for whatever.
Amen.
It's amazing.
That's exactly right.
It's amazing.
Now, yes.
Yeah. Even before now. The guys that kind of wrote the bill, very few of those guys are left of center even,
Agreed.
Anyway. So the final question is, what has most surprised you in life?
What has most surprised me in life? Wow. I suppose that could go in a whole bunch of directions. most surprised me in life. Listen, tying it all into the rest of the conversation, I suppose, having learned that you can go through what feels like absolute catastrophe and rebound quickly and, more than one time, is what's most surprising to me, I suppose, in life, Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have seen it coming. I always had a pretty structured life grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, was always going to college, thought that I had the game understood when I was in my early 20s, Yeah. I realize now in my late 40s that I don't know much of nothing about nothing. But, I do know if you just put your head down and work hard, it still works in this country, like it or not, this is still, a place where if you put your head down and work hard, you get rewarded. That's just the way it is.
That it means so much more, kind of all these years later, type of thing.
No question. Yeah, exactly. That's like winning the Super Bowl in your last 2 years and being John Elway, right? You know? Yes. Winning it your first year, you don't even appreciate it. Yes.
That's it.
No. Yeah. Much different now. That's a good analogy, Seth.
Yeah, and I mean, just to further agree with you, getting hit in the face, not realizing how hard you're getting hit in the face. And then not realizing how much resilience you need to have, but then realizing how much resilience you do have.
That we all have, I think. Yeah, right. I don't think it makes me special, but far from it. I think everybody's in the same boat and everybody's capable of that. No question.
Just happy to be here.
Yes. Amen.
Scott Dittman, thank you so much.
Seth, thanks very much.
So there you have it, Scott Dittman. And if you get knocked down, just get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. And hey, if it happens again, yeah, that's right, get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. So definitely fun to talk to Scott. Hope that came through. Scott Dittman, CEO, Pharmpods.